Hi, welcome to genXup. I'm your host, Grant Porter. Today, I want to talk about taking responsibility for your life. And I want to start that by sharing this statement with you. And after I do it the first time, I'd like you to say it with me the next. Is that cool? So if you're driving, roll your windows up so you don't look weird. All right, so here we go. The moment I accept responsibility for everything in my life is the moment I have the power to change anything in my life. Think about that for a second. If it hasn't been in your mind or something you practiced before, let's say it again. Are you ready? The moment I take responsibility for everything in my life is the moment I have the power to change anything in my life. I know some of you may be saying that that might be easier said than done. And I understand where you're coming from. It's not always easy to take responsibility for our lives, especially when things aren't quite going the way we want them to. So I can tell you from experience, it's worth it. I have a short a story rather to share, about taking responsibility and not putting blame on others for the circumstances. And it has to do with where I'm recording from, the boat tenacity. I don't know, it was 6 years ago, and we had the same kind of weather we're having in California now, where we have what we call the Pineapple Express, where there's storm after storm just rolling down the coast. And I had taken on this boat as a fixer up project after it was clear that my marriage was not going to work, and we were going through divorce. We'd already been separated for about a year when I got the boat. And so I rolled it up into the boatyard, put it on jack stands, and knew that it was going to be a big project, and one that probably would have been better to pass on and pack to backpack and, taking that walkabout that I didn't do in my 20s through, Europe and Australia. But I did the boat, which, it was both one of the most rewarding and challenging things I've ever done. But like any big project, and especially on boats, whatever you think it's going to take, it's usually 3 times the amount of work than it actually is, if not more. And I would say this boat, when I started, it ended up being more like 6. And the costs, you can use the same math. But the long story short is I had a lot of projects going on, from mechanical to electrical to plumbing to through holes to bottom. But the big one that wasn't on my radar when I accepted the boat was the aft cabin and the aft deck that's above it. And this is an area that, as you step down before you go over the transom to crawl down the ladder to go to the swim step, is what you'd walk over. It had originally 2 hatches that went into the aft cabin. One of them was actually completely missing when I got the boat, and I had planned to just enclose it up. I had gotten rid of a generator that was in the back bedroom, we called an aft cabin, because it was stinky and it was dead. So I started the project, and, I had all the other ones going on at the same time, and I was doing all the work. And it was a big, big bite to chew on between all of it. And there was, like I said, in January, a moment when I got to that deck project. I had ended up cutting the whole thing out, and I was on the inside of the boat. It was raining. I had big plastic covering the back of the boat, supported with scaffolding, but not enough to keep all the water out. So water's dripping down, fiberglass is all over me. I have a Tyvek, one of those, white painter suits on, but still there was fiberglass everywhere. I was itchy. I was cold. I was wet. It was late. It was probably 8:30, 9 o'clock at night. It had already been dark for a couple hours. All the lights, shop work lights are on, and I was fucking miserable. And I felt like I wasn't gonna be able to do it. And I felt like I was defeated. And it wasn't my fault. It was her fault. It was everybody else's fault. Where the reality was is I put myself in that own situation. And I don't know if you ever gotten to that point where you're just crushed and you're basically in fetal position, rocking yourself, thinking, how the fuck did I get here and how the fuck am I going to get out of it? But that was my moment at that time. And I worked through in my head as I sat there bobbing back and forth, like, if I gave up, then what happens? Well, my buddy owns the boatyard's got a deal, and that would suck for him. There was no way out. It had to be finished. I didn't have the money to hire somebody else at the time. The way the finances were working out in the divorce was much less than I thought it was going to be if it was a just half up the middle. And all those realities were coming down at the same moment. I hadn't been working for 5 months at that time. Cash was short. I was just losing my shit. And I sat there feeling sorry for myself. I was the victim. And it took me about, I don't know, 35, 45 minutes of just poor me. And finally I was like, you got to get control. You got to take control of this. And I literally just in my mind's eye painted a vision of the boat being completely done, sitting in a slip, having a margarita. And with that vision and changing, the statement in myself of it being somebody else's fault, I was in that predicament. It was my own. I basically pledged myself I get it done, and I did, and it all worked out great. It was really a tough battle that I faced, but I knew if I wanted to change it, it was up to me. So that was one of my personal experiences. It's not a big life, take responsibility, but it's one that I think you guys should be able to relate to, no matter what it is. Now, whatever you need to take responsibility of to have the power and control over, I'm not saying it's going to be easy for you, but I am saying it's possible, no matter what story you need to change. So you see, as we take responsibility for our lives, we acknowledge that we have the power to shape our circumstances and our experiences. This recognition is empowering because it allows us to take control of our lives and make the changes we want to see. So, one of the things I've learned over the years is that we all have a story, a narrative that we tell ourselves about who we are and why we're here. And most of the time we're not even aware of it, but it's a narrative that shapes our reality. And if you're not careful, it can hold you back. It can hold us all back. So I want you to think about your story for a moment. What's holding you back? What's stopping you from taking responsibility for your life and making the changes that you want to see? I've worked with a lot of people over the years, and I can tell you that the number one thing that holds people back is fear. Fear of failure, fear of rejection, the fear of change. Fear of change is a big one. But the truth is, fear is just a story that we tell ourselves, and it's a story we have the power to change. So that's where the power of taking responsibility comes in. When we take responsibility, we're taking control of our narrative. We're rewriting our story. We're no longer the victims of our circumstances. We're the creators of our own reality. So now I know some of you may be thinking, but Grant, I've been through so much. How can I possibly change my story? And I understand that. We've all been through the shit at this stage. And if you haven't been, count yourself lucky. But it's about how we choose to respond. I met people through the most, been through the most unimaginable shit. And yet they've come out the other side stronger and more resilient than ever. So, as you look around and you recognize that people have gone through things way the fuck worse than you, and they're thriving now, just know that you can do the same. But, they did it by taking that control, by creating their own narrative, and they decided to change their story. And that's what I want for all of you. I want you to take control of your lives. I want you to decide to change your story if you need to. Maybe your story is just epic right now and it's a giant fairy tale, and I'm very happy for you. But, here's how an example might look in real life. So let's say you've been working the same job for 20 years and you're feeling unfulfilled, you're feeling stuck, you're feeling bored, and you're telling yourself the story that says, I'm too old for a career change right now. It's too risky. I can't make enough money. But what if you decided to change that story? What if you took responsibility for your job satisfaction, and you decided to pursue a career or a different line of working and making money, or starting your own gig, or starting to start your own gig while you're still working your miserable job that you're not happy in, whatever it is that fulfills you, I can give another example. My mom, on a personal note, back when I was in my 20s, she was a stay-at-home mom, the classic era of the 70s and 80s. and, basically took care of the kids. And as we got older and she had a little more freedom, she started doing farberware demonstrations at the local Macy's and in different department stores. And that was bringing in some extra cash for her, got her out of the house, which was really great. And about a year before my father passed and us kids had gotten even older, she took a job as a secretary at a little tech startup that did mobile for cell tower senders, receivers, modems. And essentially, my mom went through a really tough time, as our whole family did. My dad passed unexpectedly at 52. A year and a half later, my little brother, who had tried to resuscitate my dad, was there. He got dark. I was living in Maui at the time. I came back, noticed his darkness, and within a month he committed suicide. And it rocked everybody's world. But my mom was really strong, and she's always had that keen ability to recognize that when you can't change something, it's good to focus on what you've got in front of you and move on. And my mom took that little secretarial job, and that company grew to over 500 employees. And she ended up being the vice president of HR, in charge of all the people of the company. And then that company sold, and they had a little hiatus with a non-compete, and the same group started all over, and they did it again. So, that's an example of somebody that could have easily played the victim card. The poor me, my husband died, my son committed suicide, just struggled with getting out of bed and taking her life down a much more tragic path instead of the one she did. But she chose to take responsibility, and it gave her the power to change her reality. So there's one story. Another good friend of mine, he was in marketing like I've been for years, and was a search rescue climber, got a career path within an organization that was in that business. There was a time when the company made some changes within the organization structure, and he was out of job. And instead of complaining about it, he looked at what he's really good at, and he's like me, he can fix things up. And he started doing handyman jobs. And this guy's talented. You'd picture him as the CEO of an organization, as a leader. He's that kind of guy. But he's gotten to the point where he just, wants to work enough. And today he's so busy, basically as a general contractor, helping people, prep their houses for sale or do kitchen remodels or just general handyman work, that he's loving it, from what he's shared with me. And I think that's just great. So these are all, stories of how, taking responsibility can change our lives. But the important thing to remember, it all starts with that decision to change your story. And it starts with taking responsibility. Once we do that, the possibilities are endless. So my question for you is, what's your story? And what are you going to do about it? I urge you to take responsibility for your lives. I urge you to take control of your narrative. And I urge you to decide to change your story if it needs changing. And I promise you, if you do, you'll be amazed at the difference it can make in your life. So that's what I've got today for you with genXup. If you like what I'm doing, I would greatly appreciate it if you hit the comment, the like button, subscribe, shared with your friends. I'm brand new. This is just a short adventure for me, and I'm trying to get better at it. So if you go to the pods, whether it's Apple or whatever, subscribe there. The way that the algorithms work, obviously, is that more people will find this podcast as more viewers like and share. So again, please do that. And of course, visit genxup.com for more information and resources whenever you'd like. Have a great night. Take care.